Hello, and welcome to the Piano Lessons for Parents podcast, the practice edition. My name is Dr. N. Mason Conklin, and I'm here to help you help your child succeed at the piano. In just a few minutes a week, you can learn the basic musical concepts that will help you supervise and evaluate your child's practice time at home, and learn some tricks and tips to help your child make the most of their at-home practice time. In this episode, I'll talk about the importance of consistency in your child's practice regimen. Children's brains are leaky vessels. What do I mean by that? Well, we get them at a lesson, and we fill those brains up. We fill them brimming full with new concepts, new pieces that they have to learn, and unfortunately, the moment they walk out of the lesson, they begin to lose that information. And if they never touch that material again in between lessons, likely they won't know anything they learned in the previous lesson. So consider the following analogy. Imagine your child's brain is like a 5-gallon bucket with small holes in it. After you fill the bucket, it begins to slowly leak, maybe about a gallon a day. After one day, the bucket is just about 4 gallons full. The next day, it's only 3 gallons. And after 5 days, the bucket is completely empty. What practicing does is it helps them refill their bucket. After the first day, when their bucket is just missing a gallon, if they practice and review the material, it fills back up to full capacity. Additionally, each day they practice, they actually patch a few of the holes, so now their bucket is leaking slower. Here's the thing though. Each day, practicing can only add 1 gallon to the bucket. It's not like you can let the bucket go completely dry and then try to fill it all up in one day. It just won't work. Now, this is just an analogy, but it is a very useful one. It highlights 2 important concepts. First, it highlights the importance of being consistent. If your child practices every day, then they can keep their bucket full and plug most of the holes. Second, it also shows that not all practice days are created equal. If your child goes home and practices right after the lesson, their bucket is still already mostly full, so maybe they're not adding so much to it, but what they are doing is they're plugging a few of those holes. And so now that bucket's going to leak less. And then if they practice the next day, the day right after the lesson, they'll fill their bucket all the way back up and they'll plug a few more holes. See, that's a very strategic thing about practicing. The 2 most important days are the day of the lesson, right after they finish their piano lesson. Right after. I mean, you get in the car, you go home, run to the piano. Right after the lesson. If they practice then and they practice the next day, well, they've really solidified that material quite a bit. And if they miss a day, it's not quite as much time to make up because they've been plugging their holes in the bucket. So, what can you do to help your child keep a consistent practice schedule? Well, one thing you can do is to ask them right after the lesson, what did you learn in your piano lesson? Go home, go to a piano, and have them show you. Point to the new pieces that they're going to be working on. Help them find their hand positions. Maybe you play through it once or twice. Something to review what they've just done in the lesson. It's very important. Second, to keep your practicing consistent, it's often very useful to tie piano practice to some other part of the day that the child does every day. So, for example, maybe practice time is right after their after-school snack. They get home from school, they have their snack, and then it's time to go practice piano. They come to expect that every day, after my after-school snack, it's time to practice the piano. Maybe the best practice time is right before supper, or maybe the best practice time is before they go watch any TV. Either way you do it, if you tie it to some specific part of the day, it becomes part of the child's routine, and so practicing just becomes an everyday consistent thing. All right, that's all for this episode. Next week on the practice edition, we'll talk about the need to monitor your child's practice to ensure that the practice schedule that you've set for them is adhered to. One other note. We actually have put this podcast available now on the iTunes store, and I thought I would show you how you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes. Now, I have 2 different versions of the podcast for you. If you want both the musical concepts and the practice tips, you can subscribe to that. Or if you just want the practice tips, you could subscribe to just the practice tips. What you need to do is go to conklinstudios.com, right here, and look in the sidebar. Now, for the full podcast, including the musical concepts, click on this button, Subscribe with iTunes Piano Lessons for Parents. If you just want the practice edition, then click on this button, the practice edition. And let me show you what happens when you do click on that. Click on the button, and it will open up our podcast page. And then what you need to do is View in iTunes. When you click on that, it will actually launch iTunes. It'll probably ask you if that's what you want to do. It looks like Safari is assuming that it's okay to do that. And it will open up iTunes. See, my iTunes button down here has been bouncing. And take you to the iTunes Store and take you directly to our page in the iTunes Store. After you do that, you can click on subscribe for free, and you'll get all the episodes, and when a new episode is available, it will be automatically downloaded to iTunes. You can then watch this podcast in iTunes or sync it to your iPod or iPhone or other smartphone that you can sync with iTunes. All right, that's all. I'll see you next week.